analysis or see an analysis of the financial crisis and the mortgage crisis, we get all the details of the mortgage industry. And some of the analyses are great, really informative. And sometimes we'll get an analysis of deregulation. What happened to Glass-Steagall? What did Phil Gramm have to do with it? Bastard, right? That's all great, but why even have the financialization of capitalism? Why did this all happen? And so the point is that there was something greater going on, which was there was a stagnation in profit. We had, and I mentioned this last time, we had organized labor able to secure benefits and decent wages for a lot of working people. We also had the monopolization of a lot of markets by large corporate interests. This squeezes out competition, right? It's a monopoly. And therefore, that reduces the opportunities to take surplus capital and invest it and make profit. So you have these different factors that are coming to a head in the 70s. And so the reaction to that, or one of the reactions, is the outsourcing of labor. Right? This is globalization. Right? You get all the manufacturing jobs that are happening in the US are being outsourced, meaning all those people are being fired or laid off, and then there's production opening somewhere else in some other country for lower wages. Okay, that got around organized labor. The financialization is a way to produce, the idea is a way to produce money out of money without production. Right? If labor's organized in the sites of production, you can either move the sites of production, globalization, or you can look for different profit centers, financialization. Right? So we get this explosion as a response to stagnation of the financialization of capitalism. So it's a response to a problem. Okay, so let me read this quote, which I think is helpful. It's by John Bellamy Foster. He writes, "For the owners of capital, the dilemma is what to do with the immediate or immense surpluses at their disposal in the face of a dearth of investment opportunities. Their main solution from the 1970s on was to expand their demand for financial products as a means of maintaining and expanding their money capital. On the supply side of this process, financial institutions stepped forward with a vast array of new financial instruments: futures, options, derivatives, hedge funds, etc. The result was skyrocketing financial speculation that has persisted now for decades." This was published in 2007, just before the collapse. End quote. And we're going to talk about some of these financial instruments in a moment. So the idea here is we are producing an alternative. Okay, and this alternative, or the implementation of this alternative, the financialization of capitalism, is also what we often call neoliberalism, right? If there's a new kind of mode of capitalism or sector within the capitalist economy that's expanding, the state institutions must change to adapt to and support, as we'll see, that financialization process. And that's what we usually call neoliberalism. Okay, so the question then is, the story I'm telling is, how does that process of financialization relate to the mortgage crisis? Right? So we went from a general crisis in capitalism, stagnation in the 1970s. The response is globalization by outsourcing production elsewhere, and the financialization of capital by finding profit centers outside of those sites of production. So what does that have to do with mortgages? Well, in the 1970s, we also started this process because of this imperative for profit of what's called securitization, right? And the idea is, in the old system of mortgage lending, if I wanted to buy a house, I would go to a local financial bank, and I would demonstrate that I have a stable job, secure income for the foreseeable future, and that I would like to get a loan for fixed percentage rate for perhaps 30 years in order to buy the house. The bank does a check on me, goes through all the fundamentals, says, you know what, it's okay. He can probably pay it back, and we'll make that percentage amount every year, right, on the principal by doing nothing, right? I have a need, they have the money, they make money off my need. That's the way the old system worked. The way the new system works is I go to my bank and I say I need a mortgage, and they say, no problem. Immediately take that mortgage and they sell it to an investment bank. That investment bank pools my mortgage and 100 other, or 100,000 other mortgages into one kind of pot, right? One pool. And then they break up that pool into slices, right? These are the collateralized debt obligations, derivatives. And then they sell then they ask the rating agency down the street whom they pay. Right? Rating agencies are paid by the banks. And say, excuse me, sir, ma'am, can you come and check out this collateralized debt obligation and rate it for me? Sure. Can we have lunch first? Sure, yes, okay. Triple A. I give it triple A. I give it the highest rating. Now, the rating agencies, if you watch any of the testimonies before Congress, when the rating agencies were pulled before Congress and they're like, how could you have screwed up? You said that this wouldn't happen. And they all said, it was my opinion. It was my opinion. Because they're not liable if they're just giving their opinion. So they're just making millions. Their profit doubled. The rating agency's profit doubled between 2000 and 2007. Because the banks just said, keep coming, keep coming. They paid them to do the ratings. They give them AAA ratings, which is the highest investment rating, on these collateralized debt obligations, which are also like mortgage-backed securities, you can call them as well. And then sold those to investors. This is very profitable. Gesundheit. But it creates, there are two serious consequences to it. One is that break between the lender and the borrower, because now the lender has sold the debt to another institution, and then we don't recognize that debt anymore. It's put into a pool and broken apart and sold as little pieces of it, is you've separated investment and risk. So if I'm the initial lender and you come to me for a mortgage, and I know I'm going to immediately sell that mortgage to an investment bank and make a bit of money on it, whatever. I'm not going to worry about your financial stability. I'm not going to worry about your credit history. I can just turn that right into a sale. And why can I turn that into a sale? Because once that mortgage is put into a pot and securitized, mixed in and then broken up, and then rated AAA, is that risk seems to disappear. Why would we turn someone down when they want to buy something that we have and we're going to make a profit from it? So that's the first consequence of this new financial instrument, this process of securitization. The second consequence is there are only so many people who have stable jobs, good financial, portfolios, and need a mortgage, right? There are only so many people. So once the banks, in a sense, saturated that market, like sopped up all that market, there was a problem, right? This is a very profitable venture. So what do? You create new customers, right? And this is the beginning of the subprime mortgage lending. So since the risk has been cut off, we can just start giving loans to people without jobs, with terrible history, with no future of ever being able to pay for it. As long as we can get that initial sale, then we can start pushing it through the food chain, right? The financial food chain, we're good to go. And this is the birth of predatory lending. It's actually profitable for the financial institutions to make the riskiest kind of loans you can imagine. And you have to think about that for a minute, because at first you think, well, this is so wrong. And usually when you see it on the news, you hear reports about it, and you're like, who would have done that? Why would you give someone without a job and without any capital a loan for $300,000 for a house? Like, it just makes no sense. It makes no sense in the old system. It makes lots of sense in dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars in the new system, right? So that's the incentive behind this. Let me talk a bit about the crisis. Fundamental principle behind justifying capital making profit out of money. What would justify that? I mean, usually you would think, well, you're justified because you earned something, you worked for something, right? But we have a system that says, no, if you just have money, like Mitt Romney, he doesn't do anything. He makes over $20 million a year and doesn't work. Okay, so he's a perfect example. It's all investments, it's derivatives. That's where he's making his money, right? So the idea is that we need to justify that. All economic systems need to justify that. If you're talking about distribution of wealth, goods and wealth, someone has to justify it if there's inequality. People don't care if there's equality, right? There's nothing to worry about. If there's inequality, you better have a good argument for why one person makes $21 million a year for not working, and other people work all day long and sometimes all night long and can't even pay their rent. That demands justification. If you don't have justification, you have revolution, right? People will, if it doesn't make sense, people will oppose it. So you have to give it an argument. The argument is risk. Capitalists make profit because they take risks. They could ultimately lose. Mitt Romney could have lost everything, but he was smart. You laugh. Why do you laugh, right? I haven't gotten there yet. But that's the argument, right? Because he's a smart investor. He took risks with capital. Bain Capital, they're a risk, enterprise. So they deserve every penny that they get because they risked it all. They put it on the line, and so you deserve a profit. That's the explanation, right?
Or did their money fair and square?
Well, there's something intuitively strong about that. There's powerful about that. If you risk something, it may not be working, but hey, I could have lost. And I think that's why people are, until maybe a few years ago, slapping Mitt Romney on the back saying, man, way to go. I wish I could do what you did. You must be really smart. Now the system is set up that you've gotten rid of the risk. And I haven't explained credit default swaps yet, which is going to be the cancer cell in this body, which will kill it. But just the idea of securitizing mortgages and creating these collateralized debt obligations, and then getting rating agencies to give it a stamp of approval, right? Mm-hmm. You have displaced the risk from the investor. They can circulate.
Where does it go?
It's on a market. It just, well, the risk is still there. It doesn't go away, right? I'll get to the risk. So the risk is covered by different forms of insurance that weren't capitalized, so they couldn't pay out that insurance, and all of your tax dollars did pay it out. So we're going to get there. Let me just get through this, and then we'll talk about these mechanisms of where the risk went. In general, we can say that the risk went from the individual investor, from the individual bank, and it was distributed into the system, right? Now, this was sold to us as the good thing about these new financial instruments, right? We were told that this created stability by distributing risk, right? Hey, everybody, just so you know, you just took on more risk, but we're all better for it. right? That was the argument. So, okay. So what happened? Well, when you give a lot of people loans that they can't possibly pay, they're going to default, right? So there's always a base, some kind of base, an asset base to all these financial, they may be leveraged 30-1, but there's some base to all of these financial instruments circulating. And in this case, they were mortgages. If people couldn't pay their mortgages in large numbers, not only do the payments stop, but then the values drop, right? So all of a sudden, one foreclosed home in a neighborhood takes down the value of a bunch of others. And that creates what? Underwater mortgages. People actually owe more on their homes than they're worth, right? This creates a crisis, and there just doesn't seem to be anything stopping it, right? So we have this, so the people start defaulting in large numbers, and then the financial institutions say, okay, this is bad. Let's assess the amount of risk, or what we call toxic assets, the bad mortgages that had been bundled into these financial instruments. Let's assess that. Where are we at? And they had all the CEOs going, where are we at? And all the underlings said, I have no idea. I don't know how these things work. I don't know how to identify how much risk we have, where the asset is located. Right? This one of the reasons we're going to see pushed down our throats this settlement on the part of the 5 largest banks involved in this, on the part of and the attorney generals of the states, is because once the shit hit the fan and people were getting foreclosed upon by the millions, they didn't have the paperwork. They couldn't show that that the bank or the investment company or the mortgage agency actually held the paper to a loan and was now collecting, or a mortgage, right? They didn't have the paperwork. So they had these robo-signers, and they did everything they could to get it done as fast as possible, to get the foreclosures through, because they couldn't actually prove it, right? The system had broken apart that link, right? And they couldn't prove it. So one of the reasons that this settlement is coming is because there's going to be a wave, right, of lawsuits and people challenging who actually owns their home. And if no one can prove it, then you get to stay in there, right? You can keep living in there. So this is one of the reasons. So this has created a serious crisis. Now let me just bring up one more financial instrument. I already brought it up, but let me explain what it is before talking about the politics of responsibility. So that other instrument is this credit default swap. Now this is a pernicious, nasty little, I call it a cancer cell. This thing is, when we reflect upon what this is and how big it became in our economy, and you understand, you're in awe. So what this is it's basically an insurance contract, but they can't call it insurance. That's why it's called a swap. If it was called insurance, that's a technical term, and it would be regulated. And it would be regulated insofar as those who are extending insurance would have to have some kind of capital to cover a loss if it happened, right? But a credit default swap is a derivative. Derivatives, these financial instruments, are not regulated. There is no agency that says, hey, Citibank, you have to have, $50 billion in capital available if you're extending $300 billion in credit default swaps, right? There was no regulation. This is why AIG went under. This is why the American Insurance, this giant corporation, right, went under, because it was insuring all these banks, but it didn't have the capital to do it when things fell apart. So these credit default swaps, they're private contracts, they're unregulated, and the difference between this and a regular kind of insurance is you can buy one They're bets against default. You get paid if someone defaults on their loan. And I say someone because it's not you. You're not insuring your own against your own loss. You're betting against someone else's loss. So I could go and I could buy credit default swaps with any institution that was willing to make a private contract with me and bet that all of you are going to lose your homes. Now, if I have the power to maybe push that fate along, that you lose your homes, then I make shitloads of money, right? And I don't know if you heard, but Freddie Mac, it just came out that Freddie Mac both tightened the restrictions on refinancing and had been investing in credit default swaps the whole time, betting against the homeowners that they extended loans to. So this just broke like 2 days ago or so. Because at first you might think, wow, it doesn't make any sense to let people default. The bank will continue to make interest if you keep, so just drop the principal. Don't, get them out from underwater. Drop the principal, they'll keep paying you for 30 years. That seems rational, but that's the old system. And that's the old system before people were betting against you. Indeed, the same people that lent to you, right? This is the scam. This is the crime, right? This is not lending in good faith. This is betting against you and then rigging the game and making millions, billions, trillions from this. What happens when one institution basically sells a bunch of insurance or swaps, these derivatives that are not regulated, for really risky investments, right? And then, or they're selling them to people who are betting against risky investments. So it's pretty sure that they're going to go down. And the question is, well, that's kind of stupid if they don't have the capital available to actually pay out a loss, right? And the idea is that they were betting that it wouldn't ever be, they never bet that there would be a recession. Everyone wants to bet on their individual failures. But structurally, no one is saying, I'm going to bet for the recession. Or actually, there are a few, but we're not going to talk about them. In general, people are confident that the system can, in a sense, absorb a loss here and a loss there, and I make mine, right? No problem. But across the board losses, then all bets are off, and you have crisis. Now, that then raises the question, who pays? And that was the bailout. That was the TARP. And the reason that the Toxic Asset Relief Program, TARP, it was $700+ billion, and it was 3 pages long, is because it's a simple matter. The banks extended all of this insurance, betting against everybody, and didn't have the capital. So they wanted the capital, and we gave it to them. Now the fucking kicker is that then they took that capital, and now they're lending it back to us at interest. Right? We gave it to them free money. Yeah, besides bonuses and executive pay, as a business, it is their business to take our money and lend it back to us at interest. And if we can't pay, then they take our homes. That's the fucking crime. Right? And they keep doing it over and over and over again. And if people say, oh, well, we got the money back, right? AIG is going to pay us back. Goldman Sachs, by the way, Hank Paulson was Goldman Sachs CEO, right? The guy that pushed through the TARP bailout. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Okay, sorry.
Take it up, Henry.
Yeah, I mean, let me talk about. Let me just jump to that actually, because I have to wrap this up so we can have more open discussion. So I mentioned that Paulson was a CEO of Goldman Sachs, right? And Goldman Sachs is one of these, they got a bailout. Goldman Sachs paid back some of that money. But the point is, they survived this and they got the money for free. And the whole crisis that we're talking about is a mortgage crisis where people, if they could get free money, they would stay in their homes. And people aren't even asking for, we should be asking for free money. People aren't even asking for free money. They're asking for refinancing for a lower interest rate, right? A reduction of their principal, not that much, right? But Goldman Sachs got it for free. AIG got it for free. And the point I want to make about Hank Paulson and all the others, we have a revolving door of Goldman Sachs and all the big banks coming through into the Treasury, right? And all the major positions, all the government economists and major players are coming right from the banks. The point there, to get to the idea of responsibility, is that we can't, whenever we hear people say, it's Wall Street, no, it's the government, no, it's Wall Street, no, it's the government. Right? Bloomberg said it's absolutely not Wall Street, it's the government who forced people into subprime mortgages. This whole discussion is a distraction. Because the people in government and the people on Wall Street are the same fucking people. And so this idea that it could be one or it could be the other, and leftists are supposed to blame Wall Street, and right-wingers are supposed to blame Washington, it's a distraction, right? This is about class, right? There's a class, and they are controlling that part of Washington, and they are controlling those institutions, and they are doing exactly what's in their interests. And as long as we split them up and call them Washington or Wall Street, we don't understand that they have interests, and their interests are directly opposed to our interests, right? They're benefiting at our loss. And so we have to do something about that. Okay, so I'll end there. Thank you very much. And let's